Hi, this is Derek Murphy. I'm going to tell you 5 tips for finishing your novel. This is actually an article that I had published on the Nanowrimo blog recently. I had some trouble thinking of these 5 tips because I've done so much work on writing craft in general. So while you might think that this is like you've got the manuscript and now you're just cleaning it up, most people think finishing the novel is just editing or proofreading and getting it to publish or ready to publish or formatting it and uploading it to Kindle or whatever. In these 5 tips for finishing your novel, I actually focused on some of the really deep craft stuff that you have to address before you go to publish. So these are almost some of the big things that are red flags if you're giving a manuscript to a publisher or whatever. These are just the things that are going to make your novel weaker, that are the most important things to focus on before you finish it up or before you think about finishing it up. So this is an article that's online already. I'm going to skim through it quickly and talk over it. But I'm also going to share, because you can just read this article yourself. I'll leave the link down below. I'm also going to talk about the book I'm writing right now, and the struggles that I'm having trying to finish it up really quickly. I'll mention my hair's a little crazy because I was getting tired of the length, so I just butchered it with scissors this morning to kind of get it out of my face. I'll go to a barber eventually and try to make it look less crappy, but for now it's fine. Just in case you were wondering, people comment on my hair more than my content often, and I wear a hat a lot of the time, so some people might be surprised that I still have hair or that my hair is a different color or whatever. Anyway, the reason I'm doing this is sort of procrastination, but I basically have been focused on getting a book done. And now that I made a little bit of progress that I'm excited about today, I'll tell you what that is. I have a little bit of, not optimism, enough enthusiasm left over without the existential dread of will I finish this book in time, that I have some energy reserves to make this video. So I hope it's a useful video. So number one is to give it a satisfying resolution. So this is tricky because in the book I'm writing, it's a book 4 of a series. It can be harder to have a character arc, a satisfying character arc or resolution in a sequel than it is for the first one, because the first book, they're usually finding things out, so there's a lot of surprises. But by the second book, they kind of know the world, so it's a lot more other stuff, where it's harder to find consistent, deep internal changes. So I say here, the way to find a satisfying resolution, it's not about what happens, it's about the internal shifts. If you want to tell the story that matters, it has to be an impossible task that's more difficult than the character is currently equipped to resolve. So they have to, in the process, become determined to a challenge that's going to destroy them because they are not able to meet the challenge. So that either they will fail and be destroyed, or they will change and find at the last minute, like whatever their fatal flaw was or the reservation, they will find whatever the thing they needed to defeat that particular challenge. And they must have a challenge that matches their fatal flaw or their character lack. I have a lot of other stuff. I have probably a whole article just about this, that I'll put somewhere, maybe writethemagic.com soon. But basically, there's a bunch of current movies or TV shows where, especially when you're doing like a multi-character, like how do you do multi-character arcs where you have like one story with 4 main characters, how do you make a satisfying resolution? And the way is that, each of those 4 characters will have their own fatal flaw, and their particular challenge that they need to overcome will match their level of resistance. So there's a young adult story. I want to say it's Fate of the World, but I'm not sure if that's correct. But there's the one main character, and we see flashes of the backstory, but not until the very end do we see the full reveal of the backstory. But as a little foil, like at the beginning of the book, he's trying to climb. He's at camp and he's trying to climb like a climbing tower, and he can't, so he fails. So setting up the character's failure and fears at the beginning of the story is good. Then at the end of the story, the conflict resolution depends on him climbing a tower even though he's the one who's most afraid of heights, he has to be the one to climb the tower, which means the other characters have done other things that they were afraid of. One character had dyslexia, so they had a problem with numbers. Earlier, it was shown that they had to like open a bike lock, but they couldn't because they couldn't remember the numbers in order. At the end, they have to stop a bomb, and he has to input the numbers and the code into the computer to stop the bomb. So we know that like this is the exact same situation that he failed at earlier. Now there's so much more tension when it actually matters, and that thing, that conflict or that final important task for that character matches the thing you've already set up at the beginning that they struggle with or they have difficulty with. And then at the end, the final character, goes down a zip line. His childhood failure or fear was, I think his parents died in a fire. So now there's a fire and he has to like walk through the fire. So and these are obvious because it's young adult, but in a lot of young adult TV shows or movies, they make the craft really obvious, which is why you can see these things. You may not want to make it that obvious, but the main thing is that, for a satisfying resolution, it's not just about the outer conflict and the battle. In the middle of the final battle, there's a point where the main character realizes this is going to destroy them. They have a shift, which might be a flashback or a deep insight as they're failing, they're about to be completely defeated, and then they remember some, word of wisdom, or they realize something, or, something happens that shifts their internal appreciation or awareness of the conflict and gives them a boost of determination or a special, boost of willpower or a special weapon even or something. And they finally triumph. So I mentioned in the book I'm writing, it's a book 4. It's a little bit difficult to have, a book 4 have that kind of satisfying character arc. I do have a lot of big surprises or reveals, but I was having trouble. You only want like one big reveal or surprise per scene. It should be like the end of the scene where you end on the shifted awareness or the new piece. A new piece of information is like an event. So it's like the thing that changes in the scene, and that's where you want to break the scene. I have a lot of things that are surprises, so I have to figure out, where they fit in the story. Where's the best, most powerful place to put this twist or reveal? I kind of figured that out tonight. And the thing that's going to happen later in the final battle scene is something like, it's not great, it's not perfect, but it's something like, which is also something you can do really easily that's common in TV shows or movie tropes. The villain basically offers the protagonist exactly what you wanted before. So the villain in this case says something like, don't kill me, I can bring your family back, that what you've always wanted, I can give you a home and a family. So to make that work, I have to dig in a little harder when I go back through my final rewrites and set something up in the beginning where she's missing her dead or missing parents, her little brother. She's missing, the childhood home that got taken away from her. So that not exactly that she's trying to get that back or that she thinks she can get that back, but she's feeling some like feelings of guilt or nostalgia where she's thinking back on her childhood. I have to set that up in the beginning so that at the end, when the villain says, I can bring them back, I can give you your happy childhood home, if you just let me live, if you just go away. That's the point of shift that my protagonist will say something like, the villain will say something like, your parents will forgive you. She carries a lot of guilt because she thinks she's responsible for her little brother's death, and her parents kind of blame her. So the villain offers her redemption, basically. Your parents will forgive you. And she says, I don't need forgiveness. So she's moving past that shard of guilt that she's still carrying, even 4 books in the series. She still feels a lot of guilt over her brother's death. She's still trying to figure out her role and her place and her powers, etc. So it's not like the most important thing because I have a lot of other things going on in this book, but it does deepen the feelings of satisfying resolution when you can have something like that in the final battle scene where it's not just, she gets her weapon and she kills the bad guy, which is going to happen. But there's a point of change. There's an obvious internalized point of change where it's not just the external conflict, but it's also the internal awareness of the protagonist, um, personality, which isn't a great word, but instead like her awareness of her condition in the field, in the world, like how she fits, her place of belonging. Those are the internal things the protagonist is going to struggle with, through the whole series. So that's number one. Number two is about unresolved conflict. And I like this one because it's really easy, but it's also something that people don't do. Routinely, the easiest thing to fix in your book will be adding more conflict. And this is a matter of if you have a lot of backstory dumps. The problem with the backstory is that they are resolved conflict. So there's no intrigue. It's really important to keep intrigue and suspense. Intrigue is about unresolved conflict that hasn't happened yet. We don't know how it's going to play out. Suspense is about unresolved questions, story questions that aren't answered yet. We don't know the information that we need to resolve the intrigue. Anyway, suspense, intrigue, I think I just screwed that up. But basically, conflict rules both suspense and intrigue, but it has to be unresolved conflict. So I sort of have a problem in this fourth book because this was going to be, an action jam-packed book. But when I was writing it, I figured out I added a lot of slow stuff to the beginning, which is going to make it a lot stronger. But it means that like what I had mapped out for my midpoint is actually going to be end of this book. And a lot of this book is low conflict scenes. It's deep personality stuff, because you also, like, before you get into the big conflict action battle scenes, you have to make readers fall in love with your characters so they care what's going to happen when they are in danger later. So if you're writing a sequel, even though this is the fourth book of the sequel, I can't just fill it with action scenes. I have to figure out, which characters am I going to kill off, or which characters are going to be in the most danger later, and how can I make readers love them a little bit more. So I kind of have a turn-taking thing where, I figure out which of my characters haven't been in the spotlight yet. They've been kind of side characters, and I give them their own full, deep conversations or backstory scenes so that readers can care more about those characters right before those characters have to, face the biggest danger or conflict. So I've done a lot of that stuff already. It's a lot of slow stuff. The reason I was kind of freaking out this week is I have now 5 more days to finish this book. I stopped doing pre-orders because I had trouble with finishing the manuscripts on time, and I still have that challenge. But I have found that putting a book up on pre-order does force me, even though it's very stressful, to get books finished more than I would if I just tried to do it on my own time. So I have 5 more days. I have about 5 more chapters. They are sketched out, but not fleshed out. So I know what happens. I know basically the sequence of events. I know what happens in those chapters, but they aren't fully written yet, and they aren't good yet by any sense. So, it's one step to figure out what happens. Then you have to actually write something, so you have something to edit. And then you have to make it good. And the goodness doesn't come until much later, until later revision. So, of course, the challenge right now is that, I'm just writing the rough draft right now. And I'm not going to have time to go through it and get the really good stuff that often happens in the next stage of polishing. So I was a little bit stressed out about that because these are these 2 chapters I'm working on are my big fight scenes. They're not the final stuff because this is a weird false ending where there's like big fight scenes and she gets kidnapped and then she has to learn how to defeat the villain on her own without any allies at the end of the book. But these are like the big battle scenes. So I have to make them really good and visual. And battle scenes are hard because I have to figure out, like, it's not just about the fighting. Because then it's just, explosions and boom, boom, that can't last very long. So with the battle scenes, there are also those revelations or betrayals or new information. There's always going to be something unexpected because smart characters don't go into conflict unprepared, which means, and all conflict has to fail because you can't have your characters just go and win the battles. That's not how fiction works. So you have to find ways, despite your characters being prepared, they still have to be surprised. That way, they're smart characters and they're surprised by unexpected conflict. So you need those two things. There has to be something they weren't expecting. Today, I won't get into the nitty gritty details, but I did flesh out one of those fight scenes very well, while also putting in a lot of really cool betrayals and twists and other things going on. I had a lot of information. I had to figure out how to parse things. I took away, there was like a double reveal. I put the first reveal in this chapter, and I'll save the second reveal until the next chapter, which is another big battle scene. Anyway, you probably don't care too much about this book. You can read the Scarlet Thread series if you're interested in my fiction. But here's just a brief overview of conflict in this article. In my book, Bookcraft, I have tons more about conflict. And even on writethemagic.com, there's a summary of the most important stuff. So there's a lot of that stuff in there too. So the third step to finishing your novel is filling in plot holes with character motivation. I like how simple this is because this is really the way that it works. If you want to find the plot holes, which is basically the stuff that just doesn't make any sense, and this is the stuff that readers will be like, why does this have to happen? Why can't there be something else? This doesn't make logical sense. The way to find that is to ask these questions. Why are the characters doing this? Why does any of it matter? So this is personal character motivation. You have to figure out, why don't the characters just stay home and not do anything? Why are they personally motivated to put themselves in risk? And how does what they're trying to achieve factor into their, what else is going on, the main plot? You can distinguish between the main plot and the side plot, but the main plot is like what your book is about. It's the biggest point of conflict, of unresolved conflict, that your character is trying to overcome. That's the main plot. So the side plots are the things with lesser conflict or without dramatic conflict that might be important later, but they're not the main thing. The main thing is it's not the, relationship between the characters. It's the war on the horizon with the evil monster or whatever. It's the big thing with the biggest consequences. That's the main plot. You don't want to leave your main plot for too long and focus on little things, especially if characters are, if there's a monster on the horizon, why are they worried about other things? Why are they, in school or whatever? You can't forget about the main plot for too long. If they can't take any immediate action or they don't know what to do, you can set that up and then they're not focused on the main plot, or, they're focused on a subplot until something else changes or until they have a way to make progress on the main plot. They have to set it up so that your readers aren't just wondering, what happened to that big thing over there? Why aren't they actually doing anything? Readers will be stuck on why didn't they just? If there's an easier thing to do, like why are the characters going into danger when they could just do something easier? So the most important part of this, which I'm not sure if I mentioned in other things, I don't remember if I pulled this from Bookcraft itself or one of my blog posts, but your protagonist needs to have a strong, consistent internal compass, and it needs to be revealed through incidents that establish their character. This is who they are. Without this reliable core identity, we won't be able to tell a story that forces them to change. So going back to what I said earlier about the point of the story is to force that change. You have to set up who they are and why they resist this thing. Another example from this other blog post that I will share eventually with all these movies and stuff, a lot of it was from the Snyder cut of the Justice League. So there's one point in there, and there's a lot of different characters, like I mentioned earlier, about how in a multiple character. One of the things the Snyder Cut did really well is that it fleshed out the backstory of all of the main superheroes, which is why it was so long, but so that you could feel the depth of the battle. There's a literal point where, the five superheroes are pulling on a chain. It takes all of their powers to resist and overcome this one villain. But in the telling of the story, each of those superheroes gets a flashback scene. And then the two superheroes who change the most, which I don't remember their names right now, but it's the robot mechanic guy and the Flash. Those are the two youngest, most human, most vulnerable, sympathetic characters who are given the biggest, deepest, humanizing backstories. And the movie is resolved. It has a satisfying resolution because those two characters get a fully fleshed out and resolved answer or antidote to the problem that they were facing in the beginning. So there was a little bit of a setup where Flash says earlier in the movie, I never go beyond the speed of light. That's one of my rules because bad things happen when I go beyond the speed of light. So he has to set that up as a rule early on in the story so that during the final battle scene, he says to himself, it's time to break the rule. It's a moment of internal shift. He's going past his limitations and his rules. He's embracing the more powerful, unstable chaos. So that's something that he has to do. So we had to set it up with his internal moral compass and create a resistance point to the thing that he's going to have to do later, because you want to have that thing be difficult with inhibitions or prohibitions by refusing the thing that the heroes are going to have to do. By setting up a rule against it, it makes it more dramatic when they break the rule to do it anyway. So as an example, I'll tell you some more about my book, because I did struggle with this a lot in the last chapter, which is partly why I was feeling so stuck, because I recognize that I have these big plot holes. Basically, they are going on another mission, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense for them to go on this mission. This is a Greek mythology. They are going to go and try to kill Hera, basically, but Hera is too powerful. It doesn't make a lot of sense why they would go on this mission to defeat Hera right now. So I added a few things. She wants to save Isis, the Egyptian goddess. My protagonist wants to save Isis. Isis might have the secret key that she needs to save her love interest. So even though this is not a good plan to go after Isis right now, Isis is, I'm confusing it. Hera right now, Hera is already injured, but they know where Hera is going to be. She thinks she might be able to save Isis and get the spell that will save her love interest. So that's one thing, but it wasn't really strong enough because she already has made that mistake in the past by, sacrificing the war to try to save her love interest. She's already made that mistake a few times. So she's not really gonna do that again, or it doesn't make a lot of sense that she would keep doing it when she's already made that mistake and suffered for it. So there's another piece where Hera is also causing a plague, or they think Hera is causing a plague. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, but if they can stop Hera and this plague is killing everybody, if they can stop the plague, at least that'll give her more time to figure out the other thing, the spell, the love interest, her powers. Maybe she can figure that stuff out, but right now she has to stop the plague because people are dying. That's a better motivation. That makes quite a bit of sense. But there was another pretty big plot hole where she kind of has a little sister who is Zeus's daughter, and she is sort of powerful, but she's also a little girl. She's not in control of her powers. So, and I'm giving away like all the story, but that's okay. She also has a vision of the future, and she sees her little sister killing somebody else that she cares about. So she's worried about a lot of things, but she wouldn't bring her little sister into battle. It doesn't make any sense for her to do that when she could leave her at home safe. But the leader of their little army resistance does send her little sister into battle. So I have to explain why she doesn't refuse, because I need the little sister to be in the battle because she has a crucial role to play, even though it doesn't make any sense for her to be there. It wasn't smart. It was a liability to bring the little sister into battle, but she has to do it anyway. So I actually reflect on it a little bit. I do it anyway. On the one hand, just add a lot more conflict and drama, because now she's questioning, why did the leader send this little sister character? She's just a kid. Why did she send her to battle? But she doesn't want to argue about it because she's already afraid the leader's not going to let her go and rescue Isis. And the thing I say somewhere in here is that if you want to get rid of plot holes that don't make any sense, you just have to raise them and address them, because readers will be picking them apart. Readers will be asking these questions. Why didn't they just this? Why does this have to happen? This doesn't make any sense. So even if you don't have a solution or an answer, you can fix it by just raising it in dialogue. Any mention is better. As long as you have some excuse about why they didn't just something, that's fine. That's it. That's good enough to fill in the gap in logic or continuity. So basically, I have my main character right before they leave say something like, why are you letting us go on this stupid mission that's, we're probably going to fail? And the leader has this little speech about, you learn more when you fail. Knowledge is the real precious power or whatever. So he's willing to put them at risk because he might learn something from it, which is, terrifying. But he's really Machiavellian like that anyway. So she believes him, and it just gives an excuse for why this mission is even going to happen, even though it's not very smart. She has her personal motivations for doing it despite the risk, but the leader doesn't have the motivations for allowing this risk when, the whole war is at stake. So just by having her raise the question and, give space to the answer, even if it's not a perfect answer, even if he's not telling her the truth, it's enough to move on, and allow the thing to happen. Later, of course, she can blame him. She can blame herself for the mistake. But in the moment, you just have to fill it in enough to go further. Number 4 is let readers picture your story with detailed description. There's a lot of really good stuff in here about description and how to do it better. I have a little side note about metaphors, analogies, and similes that I think you should look at. Basically, you want to be putting pictures in people's heads, but you don't want them to be picturing a bunch of random stuff. So a lot of inexperienced writers love to use metaphors, analogies, and similes, but they just throw in too many. So on one page, you'll have a dozen different references, and whenever you're using a pictorial reference, that's what readers will see in their heads. So you want them to see the scene. You don't want them to be seeing all of these symbolic comparisons you're making, because they will picture it. Sometimes those can be used well. You can put pictures in their heads to deepen the scene, but oftentimes they are distracting, and you really just should be focused on making the scene itself vivid so they can picture what's actually happening, not just the comparisons. Because the other weird thing about metaphors, analogies, and similes is that they are transparent. Somebody is making them. So the readers know that it's authorial commentary. It's the author telling readers that this thing reminds them of this other thing. It's what's happening in the author's brain transferring to the reader's brain. It's not what's happening in the scene. And it can slow down the actual scene of the conflict. It's good if, if you're sort of in somebody's head and one of your characters makes a simile or the analogy, it's good in dialogue, but be careful about just injecting too much of your own visual, creative, fun stuff, because it can be really distracting. Anyway, I'm not going to talk too much about that, at least in my description. I do tend to add my description in the late editing stages. So like I mentioned, I'm still going through and polishing and writing the last few chapters. But like the last day or two, I'm also going back through it and noting, add description, add description, add description. That's like the last thing I'll do is I'll go through once everything's in the right place, once I have my dramatic core. And that's basically what I'm working on right now. I know what happens in the scene, but it doesn't hit emotional power centers. So that's what I'm fixing right now, is trying to twist things to have the most emotional impact, because that's what matters most, the story. But then in the final round of polishing, once everything's there and it's powerful, that's when I'll also go back, and just try to beef up the description, which is usually just like a paragraph near the beginning of every scene. The end of the scene is where you're probably going to have more action and where you're going to have a big shift. The beginning of the scene is when you can describe the setting a little bit, because you want to show description when your characters are receptive or paying attention to how things look. And the more conflict there is, or urgency or suspense, they're not going to be paying attention to their surroundings. They're going to be focused on the problems. The bigger the conflict, the smaller the details that they're focused on. So like when the knife is coming at them, they're focused on the edge of the blade. They're not focused on, the bookshelf or something in the distance or whatever. So the final point I have here is just prepare to publish. And this would be formatting, proofreading, editing. This should be a much longer process. I do not recommend the way that I'm doing it, which is, 5 nights of insomnia to finish the book on a deadline. But that's kind of, how I work best sometimes. I do have a list of 25 common writing mistakes, which I think will also lead to an older list of another 25 common writing mistakes. If you're doing your self-editing, these are the simple, basic writing problems that most amateur writers are making. So you can go through and just read the list and then self-check your own work, and you'll get rid of 90% of the bad stuff and really help your story to shine. So that's really important. And then I'll do a final proof with Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid. More recently, I'm basically just using Grammarly. I usually go through my manuscript like 7 different times. Most of this book that I'm writing, I've already been through it a lot. So most of it, it's pretty clean, like it's gone through 3 or 4 polishes already. It's only these last 5 chapters that I'm sort of still writing that I'm going to have to go through, 2 or 3 more times before I publish. Because like I said, I've got to get it written. I've got to find the emotional heart of the scene. Then I'll build in the description. And then finally, like probably a day or 2 before I publish, I will be doing, final checks for proofreading or editing or, fixing up the description, playing with the word choice, avoiding repetition, things like that, like the final polishing stuff. I can do that in a few days only because I have a lot of experience and because this is only a few chapters. If I had to do the entire thing in a few days, it would be harder. I will eventually, I am pretty confident that at this point that I will put out a very good, very clean story. It's inevitable that I will have, a handful of typos, but I personally don't think a handful of typos when the book first gets released is the end of the world. I know a lot of readers and a lot of authors get really upset about that. And, it's not a good idea. I'm not recommending that you do it, but I'm also not recommending that you spend a year editing and trying to perfect your manuscript to get rid of those handful of typos. Because even if you hire a proofreader or an editor, it's inevitable. Successful authors know that it's inevitable that a handful of typos will make it through countless rounds of editing. It's kind of just something that you get used to. It sucks, but it's not the worst thing in the world. If you have a team of beta readers that you can send out an ARC copy to, which I try to do, you can ask them to send you a list. I have some really nice readers who generally will send me an email saying, I found, a handful of typos, 10, maybe 20. I hope it won't be more than 20, but we'll see. And this is out of, 70 or 80,000 words. So 20 typos in 80,000 words is like 1 typo per 4,000 words or something. I'm not sure if I got that right, but it would be about 10 pages. So a typo per 10 pages or something. Not great, but not the end of the world. You definitely don't want typos on every other page because then they will, become a problem. And you want to fix them as soon as possible. So as soon as possible when you publish, and this is why I will often do a soft launch without really telling anybody about it. I'll launch a book and get it published for my pre-order date. but then I'll wait a week until I make sure I've actually fixed all the typos. And that's when I'll do a big promotion or 99-cent promotion, or I'll email my list about it or whatever. Once I am really confident that it's as clean as possible. Anyway, I'm going to leave the link to this article, and maybe I'll also try to finish or leave the link to that other article I keep mentioning about. It's basically about character arcs in contemporary media, TV show, and movies, but it's a really good in-depth breakdown. I think it's going to be really interesting. Maybe I'll make another video about that. Otherwise, I might leave the link down below on this video. Let me know if you have questions or comments about any of this stuff or publishing in general. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I have a lot of content on YouTube, and although I talk really fast and I tend to ramble, I do think that a lot of my material is more advanced than just about anything else you'll find out there. You may not agree, but if you do agree, feel free to subscribe and follow for updates. Thanks. Bye-bye.